Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 11th in my series of talks about the history of English detective fiction from 1920 to about 1960. Thank you for being with me. Tonight I want to talk about the influence of the premier board game of detective fiction, Cluedo. Cluedo is the most successful detective board game and is said to be second only to Monopoly as the most popular of all board games. It was invented by E.Pratt in 1943, an avid mystery reader and a fan in particular of Raymond Chandler and Edgar Wallace. It proved to be great fun for families across the generations and across the world. It also helped sustain detective fiction through a time when the genre was challenged by television drama and the emergence of the crime novel. While I do want to focus on how it influenced the reputation and the continuing popularity of the golden age of English detective fiction, I also want to spend just a few minutes on the history of the game itself, because it's such a nice story. It's a history that's well known, and here I want to acknowledge the Cluedo websites, there's more than one, the entries in Wikipedia, there's more than one, and the entertaining essay in Dilys Wynn's Murder Inc. And of course, the different local guides to Bromsgrove, there's more than one. Mr. Pratt is buried in Bromsgrove Cemetery, a small town in the English Midlands, which, I'm sorry, most of us would probably see as a suburb of Birmingham. It's a well-kept grave, and reminds us that here lies the inventor of Cluedo. There is, of course, no need to explain what Cluedo is. Anthony Pratt was born in 1903 and grew up in Birmingham. He left school at 15 and for a time sought a career in chemistry, his favourite subject at school. However, he realised that his future in chemistry was always going to be limited. He had neither the education nor the qualifications for it. And by 1930 we find him working his way as a musician, playing piano in different hotels as well as on the cruise ships of the day. By the outbreak of the Second World War, Pratt was in his late 30s, and he found himself working at a drilling machine in one of Birmingham's tank factories. Over a period of 18 months, he and his wife worked on their game, originally called Murders. His wife undertook the artwork. February 1945 brings us a delightful picture. In a Leeds manufacturing office, Mr. and Mrs. Pratt play their prize game in front of Mr. Norman. Could he have been called any other name? He was the Waddington's game manager. Cluedo saw the light of day in 1949, although sales were sluggish through the 1950s. Today, while it is easy enough to come across those 1965 and 1972 editions, collectors need to look far and wide if they want to acquire copies of the games from the 1950s. Cluedo's greatest contribution to English detective fiction was the accident of its timing. When most of us were given those first boxes of Cluedo for Christmas in the late 50s and early 60s, the golden age was coming to its end. Was the game nostalgia? Well, not for me. I was only 9 years old. What it was great fun. Fun founded in the established stereotypes of English detective fiction. Now, I've said in a number of previous podcasts that a hint of self-parody is an important ingredient to our genre, and Cluedo helps us along that track. It's part of the fun of both Cluedo and the fun of detective fiction. The plan of Tudor Court, where the murder was done, enticed us with what we should expect in a murderous country house. The original draft of the game included the gun room. It was removed, I suppose, to guard against the play being too drawn out, but I wish they kept it in. The characters were just the stereotypes that we might meet in a country house murder. I've always thought their names were very clever. The Reverend Green, green meaning naive. Miss Scarlet, well, enough said. Mrs. White, the cook, dusty with flour and pastry. Professor Plum, clueless. Colonel Mustard, keen but being yellow, just a hint of lacking moral fibre. And Miss Peacock, pompous and overdressed. It also introduced so many children to the principles of criminal deduction, albeit at a very elementary level. During the late 50s and early 60s, new forms of murder stories were being pushed forward on television and from new writers who worked on the crime novel. But at the same time, Cluedo was expressing and re-energizing through a different medium the strength of Golden Age fiction. The game prepared us for the fun, the self-parody. It was a traditional game that provided an absorbing introduction to detective fiction, and it prepared new generations to judge that a good mystery is solved through logic, obviousness, it had to be, with no loose ends. If we enjoyed Cluedo, perhaps we should borrow The Body in the Library, or The 5 Red Herrings, or The Red House Mystery. Nowadays, there are so many different versions of the game, featuring such detectives as Harry Potter, to The Simpsons, and of course the police of Midsummer Murders. I've always been sure that one of the enduring attractions of the game is that it is so easy to make up your own versions. I know I did many times. There are websites and Cluedo clubs all over the world. But let that not overshadow the additional, the unintended contribution which the game made to the continuing model of traditional detective stories. My thanks, and the thanks of millions of others, to Anthony Pratt, the inventor of Cluedo. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to episode 11 in my series of talks on the history of detective fiction. My name is Malcolm Noble. My website is malcolmnoble.com. I hope you'll take a look at it. The podcast page on that website includes a list of previous episodes with links if you want to catch up. I need to thank Freeze Effects for the royalty-free music. I posted this podcast on the 12th of March and will upload the next episode on the 26th of March. I hope that you'll be there to listen. In the meantime, all that remains for me is to wish you good night and God bless.